Morena, good morning everybody. Welcome to the Te Puna Kōrero meeting of the 1st of December 2022, the beginning of summer. Let's start with karakia, and I'm going to invite Taku to lead us in this. You can join in if you wish.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much for leading us, Taku. Right, let's start with apologies. Can I just ask whether Councillor Ford is online? She is online. I can't see. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm here.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thanks very much, Izzy. So there are no apologies. And let's move to public forum. We have no requests to speak in public forum. Are there any conflict of interest declarations this morning? I take it there are none, and neither are there any notifications of extraordinary business. And so we'll move to the confirmation of the minutes of Te Puna Kōrero of the 17th of November. I'll move those as a true and correct record, seconded by Councillor Duncan. Are there any alterations, comments on those minutes? If not, I'll put them as a true and correct record. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. Thank you. So that brings us to our reports. And our first report is a notice of motion on the endorsement of the Make It 16 campaign to lower the voting age. And I'll ask, I take it you've got and read this in your papers. I'm going to ask Councillor Trillin if he would like to move his notice of motion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move it with a small additional recommendation, which I can detail now.
Do we, before it's seconded? No. Yes. Let's do that.
Okay, cool. So what I might do, just to be clear, is I'll go through the full notice of motion, including the new recommendation, just so we're all exactly clear what we're voting on. So this is for report 7.1. Noting the recommendations that Te Puna Kōrero receive the report and agree to recommend that Council A, endorse the Make It 16 campaign to lower the voting age in New Zealand to 16 for both local elections and central government elections. B, noting the Supreme Court decision, the full text there. C, noting that the Prime Minister has announced that legislation will be drafted in response to the Supreme Court decision. And D, submitting to the Select Committee that will review the proposed legislation in support of lowering the voting age to 16 for both local elections, central elections, suggesting that lowering the voting age for local elections and central government elections be dealt with in two separate bills, and encouraging that the voting age for local elections is lowered in time for the 2025 local elections. So that's the recommendations as they stand. The additional recommendation I would like to include would be, I guess, 2E, noting that consultation on this issue will be undertaken by the relevant Select Committee to consider community views.
Okay.
And so I move that motion.
Okay. You'll move that. Seconded. Thank you very much, Jeff. Okay. So the notice of motion is now on the table. Would you like to speak in more detail to the notice of motion, Councillor Trill?
Yes, I would. Thank you. And I won't go on this in length because I've included most of what I think is important in the report, but I do just want to draw all of your attention to some of the key reasons behind this. So obviously you'll be aware of the Supreme Court decision that recently came out recognising that the current voting age is inconsistent with the Bill of Rights Act. both for central government elections and local elections as well. And as a result, there is this bill that is being drafted to respond to it. And that this is something that I think it's important we take a stance on as a council. It's something that will impact us as a council, the voting age. And what I want to touch on really quickly is a couple of key reasons around why I think this is important, and I also want to reflect on why I think this is important specifically in a Porirua context. So a couple of the key things. 16 and 17-year-olds are already able to participate as full adults within New Zealand society. At the age of 16, you can move out of home, you can work full-time, you can pay tax, you can drive a car. You do all of these things that we consider to be adult things, but you don't currently have any say on the rules that govern those things. You're taxed, you don't get a say on how that tax works. And you're actively participating in the workforce. You don't get a say on the rules around the workforce and things like that. So there's already this issue of 16 and 17-year-olds not having a say on rules that govern them. But also these are rules that are going to be governing their future. And this is the future that we are looking to hand on to the next generation coming through. And in my view, we should be getting them actively engaged in that process as early as possible. Partly because it's the right thing to do, but also because we'll see genuine benefits from it, I think, through a more engaged youth population. So a couple of the key arguments around this, sometimes there is a focus in the discussion on the voting age around whether or not 16, 17-year-olds have the capacity to be able to make this sort of vote. My 2 points on that would be, one, I don't think that's the right conversation to even have. We don't make the decision around anyone else being able to vote using a threshold of capacity. We don't do that for older people. We don't do that for anyone else. So I don't think that's what we should be applying. But even if it was, I think we've seen very clear evidence, particularly over the last 3 years, that 16 and 17-year-olds are capable of holding complex, well-informed political opinions and being able to back those up. And we've seen that through things like the School Strike for Climate campaign, Free Fares campaign that's engaged with our council as well. We've seen that firsthand. So I think that's worth noting as well. There are a couple of other arguments, but most of them are detailed in the report. And so what I do just want to focus on is why I think this is important from a Porirua perspective specifically. Porirua is a very young city. We talk about this a lot. 40% of our population is under the age of 25. And as a council, we have long tried to put children and young people at the heart of our city. We've made that a strategic priority since before I was on council. And it's something that we focus on in a lot of our consultation. We talk a lot about the importance of engaging with our young people, getting their views and creating a future for them. And for me, this is about walking that walk. It's about saying that we really strongly value and respect the views of young people. And we want to be able to give them an active say in their own future. And so for me, this is entirely consistent with what we've done in the past as a council. I do just want to note in terms of consultation, this is ultimately a decision for Parliament. So the full consultation process will happen as part of the select committee that we are planning on submitting to. So members of the public that have views on this one way or the other will have that opportunity to engage with the select committee. The decision that we are making today reflects our position as councillors, as opposed to it being a decision that will actively see the voting age itself be changed. So that covers off most of the things that I wanted to touch on. I think through this process, if necessary, I can have a right of reply at the end, which if people have particular questions or concerns that they've raised, I'd be happy to address then. But for now, that covers off everything, and I'd just like to say I would ask everyone to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. I'll now open it up to everybody for comments. Yes, we'll start with Mayor Baker and then Councillor Hayward.
Thank you. I have supported this, and I think you've probably heard that. I do support it for the local government. I think starting at local government is a good start. I know you've put both, but I do think they need to probably test it out on local government. Porirua is a young city. I agree. We have lots. We go out there and we discuss elections with them when we come up to our elections, and they are quite capable of voting. We have lots of adults who don't vote. So I think we should start them early. I think the civics should be enforced in schools, because actually the generation going forward is for the young people. So why are they not telling us, and they say we don't listen? This is a chance for them to actually have their say as well. So I actually don't, agree with what you're saying, Josh, so I'm happy to support it.
Councillor Hayward.
Kia ora. Hea mana tuatai mihina kai kanihira mihi. Kaumātua katoa. I'm supporting the motion, the notice of motion. I'm going to expand on my rationale as to why, putting it on the record. I'm going to start with a very simple premise. All representative democracies are built upon the foundation of self-determination. In other words, I am somebody, and that matters. The only prerequisite to vote is not about maturity, but knowledge of self. When we know ourselves and our connection to others, we become aware enough to understand that choices have consequences, and we become capable of acting, even in a small way, even if it makes making things less bad for themselves and others. What is maturity? Well, I've seen mature 16-year-olds, we all have, and I've seen some immature 61-year-olds. So let's get rid of the abstract of what 16-year-olds can comprehend and the concept of maturity. I will tell you my story between the ages of 16 and 18. My mother had already fled from my father by the time I was 16. I was back living with my dad by then, but all that had changed was that I became the target of the abuse, and eventually it was too much and I left. My courage had overcome my fear. I eventually found work. I had to apply for a benefit at the MSD. I cried to the case manager about the abuse. My dad denied it. Eventually, I found work and I kept my studies because I knew I could find a pathway to a better life. Don't tell me that 16 or 17-year-olds aren't mature enough to understand the world. I knew what was right and what was wrong. I knew I could change things, and yes, I made mistakes, and I still live with the consequences. I contributed to my community and the country, playing my part of the social contract. Some of those things were heavy duty for any person, no matter how old they are. In fact, my life then is but a fairy tale compared to some, and some are still enduring challenges that you would not wish on others. It has been many years, but I don't forget these things, and if I had those experiences, can we dispense with the BS that 16 and 17-year-olds aren't mature enough, aren't capable enough? The history of the franchise in this country was that it was only Pākehā men who owned land could have the right to vote. 155 years ago, they changed the law so that Māori men could also vote. Then 143 years ago, they let any man above 21 the vote. Then 129 years ago, they let women have the vote. 53 years ago, they dropped the voting age to 20 years, and 48 years ago, they dropped it to 18. Now, I am happy to report that the sky has not fallen down. Each time there was a choice for Parliament to expand the franchise, there was a group of people who said, don't do it, they aren't mature enough to understand what it means to vote, we must protect them. I say to parliamentarians, don't listen to them. Our city needs to back our rangatahi, and I believe it is well past time for Council to support the Make It 16 campaign as part of a range of measures to improve participation. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Are there any other councillors that want to? Yes, Councillor Weehapi.
It's a bit of a tough one to follow. Mine's very straightforward, but timing. My question is around D3, around encouraging the voting age for local elections is lowered in time for the 2025. Is that actually going to ensure that true, real consultation will happen before that time and it's just not rushed through? Although I'm happy to support this, but that's just a question possibly for somebody.
Councillor Trillin, do you want to?
Yes, so the 2025 elections is the specific ask from the Make It 16 campaign. So the rationale here, government's looking at introducing a bill, bringing it to select committee in the coming months. The idea would be, my understanding, there certainly wouldn't be any law change in this term of Parliament, and no ultimate change. The bill will be introduced, but no ultimate change. And as the bill would move through, there would be opportunities for consultation through that. I think for voting in the 2025 elections, as long as it was locked in a year before. That still gives almost a 2-year period from now to get that bill drafted, go through any of that consultation process. So it's also likely to be specifically around the local election voting age as well, with the issue of the central government election voting age is likely to be addressed later, probably doesn't have enough support in Parliament to be able to get through. So yeah, I'm confident there'll be enough time.
Councillor Wehapi, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I just want to make sure, obviously pertaining to our own city, Porirua, we have a lot of people that we would want to consult with, including Ngāti Toa, so we don't want to rush that just to try and get something through in 2025, but happy to support.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan?
Look, it's no surprise to me that since most of the political upside of this would go to the left wing and the Labour Party, that our two Labour councillors are actually promoting this idea.
Councillor Hayward?
Mischaracterisation through the language. It doesn't benefit the Labour Party or left-leaning parties, it benefits the entire country.
You like to reword, Councillor Duncan? Or just
No?
carry on.
Okay, so
Point taken, though, Councillor Hayward.
I think we've lost our way as councillors with this decision-making process here. We were all elected to represent the people of our city. And when we look at the polling regarding changing this, upwards of 80% of the population say it shouldn't happen. But in true Labour form, we know best. Let's push this through. I think that with the polling I've done, with the polling that's been done by the companies around the country, 80% of people saying, don't do it. That's good enough for me. I'll go with that.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Yes.
Councillor Duncan,
Johnson.
I couldn't disagree more, and I possibly side to the right, liberal right with you, but my recent experiences...
What's your point of order, Councillor Duncan?
yeah. Anyway, I probably find the youth of today, or young adults, some of the most stimulating company I spend time in. They stimulate me, they push me. I mix in a range of various circles, from alumni at the top of the south with Wakatu, who are just so bright and vibrant. I can't wait to see what they do for our country in the future. More recently, I've been at more creative and more of a creative environment at Messi and also at Whitecliffe and the design students. And the debates and the power behind their designs and what they're representing is inspirational. And while I may not just see it all quite the same as them, I think they have a right to have their voices heard. They're really connected with our current environment, and I want them to be heard going forward. So I'm a big supporter, and thanks for the good debate around the table this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. No, we'll go back. Councillor Philo.
So New Zealand usually is I think the trailblazer in this kind of change. You know, we are the first country to give wahine the right to vote. In this case, there's already 9 countries that have already done this. And so what's good about that is that we're actually able to learn from them, get insight and apply that and maybe predict, you know, how this could affect our outcomes in our city and in our country. I've looked into both, or not both, a lot of those countries, and I've talked to quite a few teenagers as well this week, and even some colleges in our area. So I think I've looked at this from quite a few angles. I do have concerns as well, but I believe that the benefits will outweigh those concerns. So I am supporting this for 2 reasons. The first one is the Bill of Rights, okay? So the Supreme Court has ruled that this isn't consistent with the voting age, it's not consistent with the Bill of Rights, And the Bill of Rights is important. That is protection of our freedoms, protection of our liberties and our rights on so many levels. Is that echoing?
Slightly,
Slightly,
but it's
okay.
okay.
Okay. The second reason is because I do believe that this is an opportunity to disrupt change in a positive way in our voting trend, right? And particularly in our city where we had something like, 36% voter turnout?
39, wasn't it?
39. Okay. So what we learned from Austria, from Scotland, was that in actual fact, the 16 to 17-year-olds came out and voted in a much higher turnout than the 18-year-olds and the 20-year-olds. When you are 18, I believe there's a bit more of a disruption in terms of your transition. 18-year-olds are thinking about going off to uni, maybe leaving home, maybe getting a full-time job or changing areas. Whereas at 16, you're at school most likely and in the family structure. So there's more opportunity there to actually have accessibility and also for the civics and the political information to be brought to them. Right? I do think a bit needs to be ironed out with that. It's particularly for colleges who... there was a bit of a mix from the different colleges I spoke to. Some do need a bit more uffy, and I think there's opportunity for community, for us as council, for even the electoral commission to pitch in and help to inform, right? Because there is a gap. There is a gap for a lot of kids. I did speak to some 16-year-olds who didn't care. They didn't care, right, if they got to vote or not. And could that be because maybe their parents don't care? So that's where there's this opportunity within the civics and the political information that can be taught to them. I think Aristotle put it pretty good when he said that good habits formed at youth make all the difference. Right? So if we can get early voting experiences that could translate into shifting this trend of future voting, I think that's a really good thing. I do acknowledge that, I can't remember who said it, but are they old enough to decide? There's actually, I have a 17-year-old. There are a lot of decisions made, and I was 16 once, out of emotion, the emotive part of the brain. That's true. But there's actually no neurological evidence to suggest that there's much of a difference between a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. And in actual fact, if that is the argument, then the prefrontal cortex of our brain isn't really developed until 25 for some people. So we could argue that would have to put the age up completely. And I do agree there are some 61-year-old immature, and you really can't, in terms of political maturity, that is something that is hard to discern. There are some 16-year-olds that could outperform their older counterparts, I believe. But in terms of, I do want to express too that some concerns that I have heard is that does this open the door to lowering the drinking age? Does this open the door to lowering consent age? And that is something that I would be opposed to. That is a concern, but I think that would need to be dealt with if it came up. So it shouldn't affect the actual age of voting. That's my point on that. And my last point is that I agree that rangatahi and Porirua, they are our priority. One of our main priorities. They do make up a large part of our population, and they have a lot of challenges, right? Even more so when maybe I was 16 not so long ago. But one of the main ones in New Zealand is that momori for rangatahi is extremely high. We are one of the highest in the OECD countries. And so could this, having their voice heard, knowing that maybe their voice matters in affecting change, could that uplift their wairua? Could that empower them even more? I do think more needs to be done in terms of getting electoral engagement, but I think this is a good start, so I will be supporting this. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Philo. Councillor Waddle.
I'll keep it reasonably brief, but it's pretty clear to me that I will be supporting this. Councillor Trillin's highlighted it really clearly that we expect so much from people under the age of 18 and over the age of 16. They can start a family, they can be out on their own. Hearing Councillor Hayward's story, that's happening everywhere. There's all sorts of things that we're expected to do from 16 and over, and even younger. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Waddle. Councillor Nalo.
So I think like in any decision making, there's a lots of, you have to weigh up the pros and the cons. I too, like Kathleen, have spoken to a couple 16-year-olds, but also, surprisingly enough, I was also 16 as well at some stage. And when I think about the 16-year-olds of this day and age, the world has changed drastically. And I feel like this day and age, they're way more mature than what Kathleen was, or myself when we were 16, as she said a couple of years ago. I think this would prompt healthy civic habits amongst our rangatahi. It would help acknowledge their contributions to society and to their communities. It would provide a true reflection of a rangatahi voice. We keep harping on about we listen to our rangatahi and we put them at the centre of everything. But what better way to do it than give them the chance to be equal with us and vote? For that reason, I'll be supporting Josh and this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nalo. I think everyone's... Sorry? Taku, do you want... Oh, sorry, yes. I can't see. So Councillor Ford, do you want to make some comment?
Yeah, I did. I had my little brown hand up. I don't know if you can hear me.
No, sorry. Oh, now I can see.
Okay. But you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, yeah, sweet. All good. There's not much else I can add. I fully support this. I think that even without having the right to vote, 16-year-olds are out there advocating for the issues they care about, and they are bringing about positive change. But more than ever, they're informed, they're knowledgeable, they're mature enough to make those important decisions as they already do, in their daily lives. I think that there's a real opportunity for us to have to go to a captured audience. They're in the schools, and as many have mentioned before, I heard the Mayor say as well, civics needs to be in schools, and this is a good way to have that in schools. And I think Kathleen might have mentioned a percentage in terms of voter turnout. It was 33% in Onipoto Ward, 45 in Pātanui. Now, in Onipoto Ward, that's a real young population. Anything we can do to get our youth engaged in this whole process, and the younger we can make it happen, I think that's a good thing. So fully supportive, Josh. Way to go.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Yes, Taku, please.
Yeah, I totally support this this motion. I mean, as 16-year-olds, I had uncles that through the Māori battalion, and we may have all had uncles that fell on field at very, very young ages. They made a decision at that time to face the enemy, to make this country a free country for us all, and to live and feel and free as we so deserve. And so at 16-year-olds, some didn't want to go, some went to different stations, to join up because they wanted to get over there you'd be surprised how young they were, but they did. And so I'm supporting this bill well and truly to give their voice a say.
Thank you, Taku. I'll make a few comments as well. Look, I'm going to vote against this. And the reasons are that unless we have a comprehensive, I've heard people talk about civics, But unless we have a comprehensive civics education system driven by central and local government partnership, when has that ever happened? And that would help build children as citizens right from the very start of their lives. This is really just middle-class feel-good stuff. I'd be open to supporting it if there was a comprehensive package and a strategy about building participation across the board, but I don't see that. If there'd been a real effort to engage 18-year-olds in the last election, accompanied by some success in that, I'd have more faith. I just don't have faith in that system. Our education curriculum is already jam-packed. Look, there's no real public resourcing or effort has ever gone towards pushing voting among young people, civics in schools, and no measure of success has ever been applied either. Certainly, no education about responsibilities that accompany rights in society. And unless we see that commitment, until we see that commitment exists and will occur, I just can't support the measure. And I feel that, Councillor Duncan and I will be a voice among many thousands of Porirua residents who also oppose this. In fact, the New Zealand Herald poll that Mike, you said 80%, 79% in the New Zealand Herald poll. Now, I'm not going by polls. I would, as I've said, I'd like to support it, but it needs to have a commitment for these other things around civics before it will ever be successful. Otherwise, it's just throwing numbers at it. All right. Councillor Trillin, you want to have a right? All right. Councillor, I'm sorry, Mayor Baker.
Sorry. I'm just going to reply to that because I've got that letter that I sent out to everybody, could I support as mayor, the signing the 16-year-old that came in. I've heard the numbers around the table. I will note that the pair of you are going to vote against it, but I will be signing that letter. And I would remind you that we've had Bronwyn Kwok, Nick Leggett at these tables, 18-year-olds, and they had plenty of civics in their education, I'm sure, from 16 on, because those councillors, and one became a mayor, were very intelligent people, and there is a lot of very bright kids out there that are able. So I will be supporting this letter. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah.
I'm happy to acknowledge both of you on that you didn't support, but I will be signing that.
And it'll be recorded in the minutes. The letter will go anyway. This is a majority. We haven't voted yet, but it's likely to be a majority decision by council, and you have every right as mayor to go ahead and sign that letter. Councillor Trillin, you want to make some comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to respond to a few of the comments I've heard around the table. First, I'd like to start by thanking all of those who have voiced support for this. I really do appreciate the support for this motion that I'm hearing. And I think some people have made some very good points that I didn't have myself as well, which was very cool to see. There's a couple of things I wanted to touch on, just the comments made by Councillor Duncan around the potential reason for supporting this. But my point on this would be we should never make a decision around who is allowed to vote based on who we think they may vote for or may not vote for. And for me, this has nothing to do with that. It was one of the main women that was, one of the main arguments that was used against giving women the vote was that they'll just vote the same way that their husbands do. For me, it's not a strong argument, and it's not an argument that we should consider. People have the right to vote, and it's a question of fundamental rights. And the Supreme Court has told us that this is a breach of fundamental rights. I'm very clear on that. As things stand, the voting age is inconsistent with the Bill of Rights Act and the right to be free from discrimination, specifically free from age discrimination, and we've been told that that is the case by the highest court in the land. Just around some of the concerns that Councillor Filo had raised around potentially lowering other voting ages, and I understand the arguments being made there, and I think it's something that we can and should do, that we draw a clear distinction between rights that we view as being fundamental to participation in a free and democratic society, and other forms of rights as well around things like the drinking age. So I do think that's a good point. And I think we can clearly draw that distinction, and I'm comfortable in doing that. On the point raised by yourself, Mr. Chair, on around civics education, it's an argument I've heard before as well. I have a couple of key things here. The first, and I think the most important, is that this isn't a standard that we apply to anybody else. We don't require a 37-year-old or a 64-year-old to go through a civics education course before they're allowed to vote. We make the judgment that they are allowed to vote because they have the right to vote. And questions around what we provide in terms of access to education opportunities around that are a decision that we as a society make and that the government will make. But that's something that comes secondary to that foundational and fundamental right to vote. And in fact, if that's something that young people want, let's let them vote for that. Let's give them the opportunity to say, maybe we want civics education in schools, and they have the opportunity to vote for that as well. But the further point that I would make on it actually is that often we do hear this argument around civics education and we should do that first. And for me, it's a real chicken and egg problem, because we talk and talk and talk about it and then it doesn't happen. For me, actually, we can look at this the other way. If we introduce voting for 16 and 17-year-olds, I think the points that Councillor Ford made around having that captured environment in schools for things like getting people to enrol to vote is a really good one. And that also provides a really great education opportunity. The potential value from us as a council, if we knew that students in our schools were voting, it would make sense for us to devote resources through our Democratic Services team and other teams as well, to actually go into schools and engage with those young people and help them enrol to vote. It would mean that schools that are teaching topics like social studies and geography, when they're teaching those, they're doing it in context of knowing that their students are going to be voting soon, and it makes sense to teach them about that. So I actually completely agree, and that I would love to see comprehensive civics education in schools. I think it's really important. And I actually think that this is a step towards being able to achieve that. But regardless of that, this comes back to it being a question of fundamental human rights. And that's what we're making a decision around here. And so what I would end on is just by saying, again, reiterating my points from before, here in Porirua, we always say that we value the views of children and young people. So today, let's walk that walk and let's value the views of our rangatahi. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Trillin. Eloquently put. I don't think there's anything further to say. We'll now put the recommendation, your notice of motion. Can we be reminded what the addition is? You have the what Josh has recommended on paper, but can we have the additional?
Yep. So the additional 2E is note that consultation on this issue will be undertaken by the Select Committee, which will consider community views.
Very good. Very good. So I don't think we need to go any further than that. So I'm now going to put the recommendations with the addition to E. All those in favour?
Aye.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Ford. Those against? No. And yes, I would like my vote recorded. Yep, thank you. So, thank you, Councillor Trillin. Thank you, Council. So that moves us away from that to something slightly more concrete, which is the finance report, item 7.2. I'm going to move this to put it on the table. Do I have a seconder, please? The finance report, 7.2. Yep, Councillor Hayward. I note that this report is Joe here? Oh, yeah, you are here. I was looking over there. I couldn't see you, Joe. I know you will note that this report is a short report, unlike some of the finance reports we have received previously, and this is the start of things to come. So, Joe, would you like to introduce this and talk us through it?
Thank you. So first of all, there's no, on an information basis, this is the same amount of information that you would have received in the reports that were a lot bigger. So we have done a check through to make certain that we didn't exclude anything as we went through. So it's a more succinct view on 2 pages, which most probably will grow to 3 over time, of where council sits. It's the end of the first quarter, so that's the quarter up to 30 September. And overall, the result is a good result. We are tracking close to budget. You'll see the revenue lines are down against the budget. There's a couple of main reasons for that. Is historically we've only recognised development contributions and vested assets 6 monthly, and vested assets usually annually. We profiled the budgets to recognise them monthly. We didn't have enough with the audit, getting through the audit. The resources of the finance team were actually on getting in the financial reports for the annual report, but we have from October now picked up monthly vested assets and development contributions. Just so people know what a vested asset is, that is when there is a development, and for example there might be roads and drainage, a reserve that's done by a developer. It then passes to us, to our ownership. So people want to understand what a vested asset is. And development contributions, we've now set up a process monthly. You'll note that our subsidies and grants are behind budget. That is because in the budget we've got the Kōrero contribution to Bothamley Park and the high level reservoir. So we're now making those things transparent on where there's other sources. And Wakikitahi subsidies, they're actually higher because of the emergency work that happened in the flood event in August. So again, that's more yet. Our capital side of subsidies and grants is down because the capital program for transport is behind. So they would be the key ones from the financial, from the revenue perspective. From the expenditure perspective, personnel costs are lower. We discussed that in relation to the annual plan. We have got high staff turnover at the moment, but that is actually they're pushing those costs from personnel for key functions into other expenses where we're required to use contractors. They would be, interest is still tracking positive. That's because we haven't borrowed as much as we forecasted, but we are actually incurring additional, so our interest costs are 1% higher than what they were this time last year. So that is only a temporary variance. We would see that coming closer to tracking to budget. On the statement of financial position, there's no major variances. And then on the capital program, last to Puna Kōrero, we considered the major projects report. For going forward, these reports will come together, so you'll have both the project reporting and the finance reporting together, so you get that connection between the major projects and how it's tracking in the dollar terms. There's nothing inconsistent in the capital space that wasn't reported last time in the major projects report. And then we've got the activity statements on the second page. When we did the budget, we did the budget and the annual plan. We did that on the assumption that we would be able to use the Three Waters better off funding for leaks, etc. How it got divided up in the annual plan was reasonably spread across the Three Waters. Now that we've firmed up the tranche 1 funding, it's predominantly in leaks. So we will be in Te Puna Kōrero in early February recommending some budget transfers to realign that funds. So that's a key summary of the report.
Thanks, Joe. That's pretty comprehensive. And are there any questions from councillors? Yes, Councillor Hayward.
Kia ora no. Page 19, just back to the first side of the 2-pager, just around the DCs and the underspend. Doesn't say in there though, I understand the explanation about trying to, a change of reporting and the source of the data. I'm trying to get a sense, though, are we projected to be on track at the end of financial year based on these changes in reporting, irrespective of these changes in reporting?
I've got the draft October results here. We are actually above on development contributions. So our profile for the budget was 791,000, and we're at 940. So we're above budget that on development contributions. We are behind still on vested assets, and we're going to map through because we only pick up the vested assets when the development is actually finished, and the budget is divided by 12. This is some of the focus that we'll have on, is actually getting really clear for developments coming through, when do we expect. So this is a journey for us.
Certainly. Okay.
Following on, if there is a decrease in housing growth in Porirua, we would expect to see the DC revenue stream being one of those first indicators of there being a decline. Would that be accurate?
No, we wouldn't, because what is actually the DCs are on what's on the annual plan and on the developments, so it'll be a lag. The first thing we'll see is the revenue and fees and charges under building consents. That would be the first indication.
Last part, Ty, and it's just around the, you alluded to it at the end of your presentation, but can I just get a clarification here again around the budgeted spend on wastewater, drinking water, the three waters part of it? There was some scheduling and contract related delays. Is there any clarity from Wellington Water that they've factored in a catch-up period, knowing that they have had to take a little bit of time to get those ducks in a row?
Do you want to answer that, Andrew? Thank you.
Through the chair, top of the head figures, we're giving Wellington Water 52 million of capex. At the moment, they're signalling they'll spend 36 million of it. Last year at this time, they were signalling they would spend 80% of their capex. They actually spent 103%. What I'm doing at the moment are what I'd call opportunistic capex projects in Porirua East, where KO or Tiaranga Alliance are up there and saying we have to put in a pipe, and because they've got a crew there, we're saying to Wellington Water, might make sense to bring one of our pipes forward and get it sorted at the same time by their crew. And we're doing some deals where we're trying to spend a bit more capex through that alliance and those contractors up there. Whether or not we can get it done this year or roll into next year, but I've signed off on 4 of those deals now. So I'm hoping that it will go over 36, but it is the nature of the market at the moment, and I guess some of the difficulties around doing some of the projects.
Hayward, that answers your question? Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Duncan.
Personnel costs. Under budget by 387,000, but other expenses are 683,000 up. Have we covered those specialist areas yet?
So as we went through the annual report, we had the change in accounting policies on how you recognise software as a service. And that's one of the major drivers of the other expenses being higher, and also which was 256,000, which historically would have been in the capital space. And the other area is around the emergency works from the slips that happened in the first quarter in transport. But we are still seeing increased costs in contractors. But the big driver of the other expenses is predominantly emergency work and Datascape.
So just to be clear about that, so does the increase in contractors, would that be more than 387,000?
I can't answer that straight off the top of my head. So.
Yeah. All right. No, that's fine. Councillor Filo.
So just to clarify, are you saying that the the software and the emergency work make up the bulk of the other expenses?
So
or-
of that 256 is Datascape, and the emergency work was 122,000.
We're talking about bulk of variances, not
Yeah.
bulk of
Dollars.
other expenses total. All right? Yeah. Which is made up of a whole lot of things. Yeah.
We've also, you'll see that our resource consent revenue are up, and that's resource consent other expenses as well. So a lot of them match up, and you'll see in the 31 December report, we're going to focus on being able to explain where the revenue is up and the expenditure goes up as well, because we get that matching.
Can you also explain what employee entitlements are?
That's annual leave. So that's the annual leave, really.
So any other questions, councillors? Thank you, Joe, for that. We look forward to this report as it matures over time. It will get more comprehensive for us and more useful. So I'm now going to move the finance report. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll now, I'll ask Taku again to lead us in the karakia to close the meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
Te Māori no. I tarangi ne. Atu. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll declare the meeting closed at 9:21.